It's nice to have the daffodils on the Butsudan this evening. In Gaelic, they're called Lusan Caun Krian, I think. There's a bent-headed plants, right? And the Latin is narcissus. They're named after, well, Narcissus, who looked at his reflection in the pond. It's a kind of an appropriate flower for a Zen practice, I think. And it brings me to mind of a conversation that I was having with mentee, Zen mentee this morning, about what? About the value of practice and ways that practice, Zen practice, this practice of zazen, can impact our lives. So often when I'm speaking about Zen practice and how to kind of, how to do it, I guess, when we're sitting, one of the metaphors that I'll use often is it's like sitting by the edge of a stream, just on the bank of a river that's going by. And as we're sitting there, just with our eyes down in front of us, watching the river go by, inevitably there's stuff that floats along the river, sticks and branches and leaves and every other kind of stuff, just our thoughts and our feelings. And we find as we sit, we stabilize the body, we connect with our breath. And at the beginning of our practice, that's a lot, actually. There's a lot going on with our bodies. There's a lot going on with just holding ourselves in the position and connecting with our breath. If we're doing a susokan or a breath counting exercise, there's a lot. It seems like there's a lot of stuff to track. And just as soon as we start paying attention to our breath, we notice that our posture is off and got to fix that and fix that. And then we come to a place where we're kind of a little bit more stable. There's less things happening with our body. The body's become more still. The breath has become more even. And as soon as that sort of structure starts coming into place, we start to tune in a little bit more and become a little bit more aware of what's going on inside of us as well, the thoughts and the feelings that arise. And our thoughts and feelings, when we sit, particularly as lay people, we've got lives going on. We've got jobs to do, and we've got relationships that are going on, and kids to raise, and all of that kind of stuff. Not to mention all the stuff that's going on in the broader world. So as the body comes to stillness and stability, there can be this real upswelling of internal stuff that suddenly takes the whole space up. And we're here going, I'm trying to meditate, and all this stuff is here. And I always think of that as sort of as these things, these thoughts, these memories, these to-do list items are coming down the river. Our habit, our tendency is to kind of go, I need that, or I need to figure that out, or that's terrible. And it's sort of like reaching in and grabbing that thing out of the river. And in the process, we get completely soaked. We get completely immersed in the river, and sometimes swept along down the river by our thoughts and by our feelings and by everything that's going on inside of us. And 5 minutes go by, 10 minutes go by, and then we sort of pull ourselves out of it and go wow, this is supposed to be meditation, and all I've been doing is sort of churning with current events, or churning with that interaction at work, or churning with, what went on with my child this morning. And so the practice at the beginning is really one of learning how to just hold your seat on the bank. Using these methods of breath and body to just hold your seat solidly on the bank, to allow whatever it is. We don't even know sometimes what's coming down the river. I use these nice, there's a leaf and a twig. But the reality is sometimes there's toxic waste that comes down. Sometimes there's bodies that come down, and they trigger all kinds of stuff within us, thoughts and feelings and reactions and responses. Sometimes we want to jump up out of our seat and get out of there. We've got things to do. We've got to get going here. But the first part of our practice is really being able to hold our seat, to continue to have our awareness and our presence and our attention on that flow of the river, to be watching what is going down, but at the same time not feeling a need to react to it in either way, not feeling a need to sort of jump in and rescue it and pull it out or figure out what it is, and not having the reaction or response of saying, I can't witness this anymore, I need to get out of here, I need to stand up and go away. Just sitting, just observing, keeping our attention just in front of us about what's going on. And there's a lot of things that happen in that very simple practice. It sounds really simple, but you've all been doing a little bit of sitting, so I think you probably all know that it's much easier said than done a lot of the time. Sometimes when the things that are flowing down the river aren't to our liking, we can start looking at the scenery around us and sort of distracting ourselves from the unpleasantness of what's being carried by the current of our thoughts, of our emotions. And so this practice of just recentering, coming back to the breath, returning to the body, and just this sort of presence, watching what's happening as we sit. And again, I talk about this environment or this container of formal practice of our space on the cushion as being sacred space, or being like a training ground, or being like a laboratory. It's a very, in many ways, controlled environment. We set up structures. We have rules: be quiet and sit still and all, sit like this. So it's really, in a lot of ways, an ideal environment. But by training in this way, by practicing in this way, that capacity to be, first of all, aware that it's even possible to sort of hold that kind of stable, strong stance, which is not dissociated, which is not distant, which is not disengaged, but it's aware, non-reactive. Being able to really deepen ourselves in that practice of sitting on the bank, what we start to find is that as we go out into our lives, into our workplaces, into our different relationships and different circumstances, is that capacity, that spaciousness that we've been cultivating through seated meditation practice, it starts to come with us. And what we start to notice is that in our conversations, there's a sudden spaciousness. Some people talk about it as there being like a beat or a moment of time more than there was before, where when we're having a conversation or we're in a circumstance and something happens where normally we just react, much like when we see something floating down the river, we jump into it or we run away from it, but now we're just sort of like watching it, observing it, noticing it. Then in those conversations and in those moments, there's this capacity to actually notice what's happening in that moment and how we're responding to it, the thoughts that arise in that circumstance, the feelings that arise, even the sort of momentum to react in that moment. We notice it. And that spaciousness that we've been developing, cultivating might not be the right word. It's more like ripening. It's more like this tree is growing fruit. It's a fruit of practice, that spaciousness, that pause, that gap in time where we actually have a moment to be aware of our own thoughts, to be aware of our own patterns, to be aware of our own feelings and reactions and responses. And the more we practice, the more we experience this in a consistent way, it's like the more space there is, the more time there is. And in that space, we have the wonderful gift of being able to choose, of being able to discern a way forward, a path of response rather than reaction. Because no matter who we are, we grow up through lots of different circumstances, and we cultivate lots of different reactions, triggers, survival mechanisms and patterns. And if we don't ever cultivate this capacity to increase that space, to develop that sort of stable seat, not only when we're sitting, but when we're walking and standing and talking, then each time something comes up, our pattern is to just react in the same old way that we always have, regardless of the outcome. And one of the real advantages of this sitting is that it creates this space where we can actually observe the reaction happening. And it's a common experience that at the beginning, we observe the reaction happening and we still have the reaction. We still do the thing that we knew we were going to do, and we feel bad about it. We feel terrible about it. And as we continue to practice, that awareness deepens, that presence of mind deepens, that connection, that ability to observe the flow deepens. And as we see the response coming, as we see our reaction, the sort of trigger floating down the river going like, oh no, am I going to jump in the river again? I jumped in the river again. It's that deep awareness of watching the power of that momentum, of watching us make the same mistake over and over again. It's that in the traditional teachings, it's referred to as revulsion. Because in spite of our cultivation of awareness, in spite of our presence in the moment, there's so much momentum behind it that it just keeps happening. And it's not until this experience of just being like, oh my God, I cannot watch myself do this anymore. That's actually what gives birth to the joriki, the energy to actually make a different choice. We have to get to the point where we say, I don't really know what I'm going to do or how I'm going to respond. This mind of unknowing. I don't know how I'm going to respond to that thing the next time it happens. I only know that I'm not going to respond to it in that same old way. And eventually, as we continue to do our practice and that thing happens or that person says that thing, we step outside of that pattern and we respond in a very intentional, a very on-purpose way. And that action that's coming from that really solid root inevitably results in a different outcome. And if I'm honest, sometimes the outcome isn't any better than the original one. But you know what? That's okay. Because what we've done is we've actually kind of broken a cycle. We've broken a response pattern. Over and over again, we have the same response, the same reaction, the same trigger, reaction, response. We step outside of it. And it's of less import of what that response is or what the outcome of that is than it is that we've actually made the step. We've made the step to be in our bodies. We've made the step to be aware of what's happening. We've made the step to choose in a conscious and intentional way a way forward. And having done that, the next time we can say, we say, oh, last time I did that and that didn't work, so this time I'm going to do something different. I'm not going to go back to what I did before. I'm going to do something new this time. And all of a sudden we're living less on these old habits. We're living less in these old patterns. More and more of our life is being lived from this place of having a really solid foundation on the side of the river and manifesting from that place in a living, aware, bright, present response rather than a reactive, habitual, conditioned reaction. So the timer's gone. So I hope that little tidbit is helpful. I think it's a very important aspect of practice. And I think it's wonderful this time of year as we're walking, as you see that narcissus, as you see that daffodil sitting with its straight back, looking down at the river in front of it, maybe we can remind ourselves just to root into that seat, to allow the thoughts and the feelings that we're experiencing in our practice and our day-to-day lives to just continue to flow downriver without reacting, without jumping in, without running away, more and more aware, more and more compassionate, more and more able to respond in a loving and generous way. If you've made it this far and you're still listening, you know what to do. Like this episode, leave a comment, share it with one person you feel might benefit from it. Subscribe if you haven't already. It costs you nothing, but it's how this podcast keeps going. Thanks for practicing with me.